former vice president of Ecuador, Jorge Glass, denounced that he was mistreated and tortured by police officers who arrested him during the assault on the Mexican embassy in Quito last Friday. A UNICEF humanitarian aid convoy was hit by Israeli gunfire while on its way to northern Gaza to deliver life-saving supplies to children. And nearly 100,000 people have been evacuated in Kazakhstan after the worst floods in 80 years hit the nation. Hello and welcome to From the South. My name is Beren de los Santos, and from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba, we begin with the news. The former vice president of Ecuador, Jorge Glass, denounced that he was mistreated and tortured by police officers who arrested him during the assault on the Mexican embassy in Quito last Friday. The former vice president appeared on Thursday in the habeas corpus hearing via telematic from the maximum security prison in La Roca. From there, Glass recounted what happened on Friday evening on April 5th, when the police kidnapped him after breaking into the diplomatic headquarters, violating the Vienna Convention. Glass, who is currently on hunger strike, denounced the many blows he received, pointing out that his ribs were kicked and his thumbs were dislocated. At the hearing, defense attorney Andrés Villegas asked the arrest be declared illegal and arbitrary and suggested as a measure of reparation that the detainee be transferred to the Mexican consular office or to the embassy of another country. In this context, citizens demonstrated in front of the International Court of Justice building in Quito to demand freedom for former Vice President Jorge Glass. The demonstrators raised their voices to express their support for Glass and thanked Mexico for its actions of diplomatic protection. The demonstrators denounced the government for kidnapping, stressing that the accusations against Jorge Glass are false and represent an attack against the truth. This demonstration comes after the Ecuadorian authorities, under the orders of the Noboa government, broke into the Mexican embassy in Quito on April 5th, attacking its personnel and kidnapping former Vice President Jorge Glass.
We are protesting the injustice that has been committed against former Vice President Jorge Glass. Because ID was set, the case of Odebrecht was already eliminated. They unjustly accused him, they locked him up, they condemned him, and despite that, they kidnapped him from the Mexican embassy. Reason why we are indignant here, and why we protest, because the government has kidnapped him. Jorge Glass, former vice president, the only one who fought for the rights of Ecuadorians. He with President Correa, we are here supporting for the freedom of Jorge Glass.
In this regard, the United Nations addressed Mexico's request to expel Ecuador from the organization, a decision that lays on the member states' approval. The Secretary General of the organization, Antonio Guterres, urged to resolve the tensions between Ecuador and Mexico through dialogue, in addition to recalling the previous accusation issued by the United Nations regarding the flagrant violations of international law by the administration of Quito. In this context, Mexico demanded the prohibition of Ecuador as a member state of the United Nations, pending a public apology acknowledging violations to the fundamental principles and norms of international law. In Venezuela, President Nicolás Maduro launches the Great Josefa Joaquina Sanchez movement, 22 years after the coup d'etat that carried out against Commander Hugo Chavez. During the event, the Venezuelan president recalled that more than 5,400,000 women have registered in the Great Mission Venezuela Women. He also swore in the team promoting the movement, made up of 517 leaders of the women's social organizations in the territory, to move forward and take on new challenges in the country. In addition, the head of state applauded the patriotic heroism of the Venezuelan women during the government of former President Chavez, who accompanied him unconditionally in his projects.
Because the Venezuelan woman from the first day that Hugo Chavez appeared accompanied him. embraced him as a mother, and always took him through all the protected roads, because the Venezuelan woman was the first one that went to the streets to look for Chavez on April 11, 22 years ago with the coup d'etat, because it was the Venezuelan woman that went to the quarters, to the streets, to Miraflores to shout that he was kidnapped, because from where so much courage, because it was the Venezuelan woman and it is the Venezuelan woman who was the first to face the sanctions, the blockade, to provide her children with food when they hid IT from US, when they forbade US to import IT, when they blocked US on all four sides.
We stay in Venezuela, where authorities of the National Electoral Council and international observers signed an agreement to accompany the presidential elections in 2024. During the meeting, the president of the National Electoral Council, Elvis Amoroso, transmitted to observers that the Venezuelan electoral system has given repeated signs of its strength and transparency. Likewise, the president of the Council of Electoral Experts in Latin America, Nicanor Moscoso, said that the work they will do will be strictly as observers and that the result of the work will be known by the Electoral Council. In this sense, Elvis Amoroso emphasized that the next election fulfills points of the Barbados Agreement, including the holding of elections in the second half of 2024.
We hope that you will accompany us in all this trajectory here on July 28, and with all the objectivity to present your final report to the National Electoral Council, your suggestions that you may have in the course of this day or this electoral holiday.
Venezuela held a presentation hearing before the Second Anti-Terrorism Control Tribunal to determine the crimes committed by Tarek Al-Aissami, former executive vice president of Venezuela. The Attorney General of Venezuela, Tarek William Saab, assured the hearing was held for the Public Prosecutor's Office to indict Tarek Al-Aissami and former officials Mark Lopez and Simon Serpa for the crimes of treason to the homeland, appropriation of public heritage, bragging, legitimation of capital, and association to offense. According to the statement, the detainees committed these crimes to execute an economic conspiracy to implode the economy through the destruction of the national currency and the astronomical rise of the dollar. This criminal performance sought to generate violence and a financial economic chaos using the destruction of Venezuelan state-owned oil and natural gas company PDVSA's public funds. In other news, CELAC authorities announced that following a request from Mexico, the organization's virtual summit on violation of international conventions by Ecuador has been rescheduled for April 16th. Through a post on social network X, the president pro tempore of CELAC, Xiomara Castro, stated that as pro tempore president of CELAC, I announced that at the request of Mexico, the extraordinary virtual summit of heads of state and government has been rescheduled for next Tuesday, April 16th at 9 a.m. Honduras time. This call is due to Ecuador's violation of the 1961 Vienna Convention and the 1954 Asylum Convention. In Brazil, 188 people involved in the 2023 coup attempt were convicted. The amount increased after the Federal Supreme Court sanctioned 15 other responsibles for the assault and Planaltos facility in an attempt to overthrow President Inácio Lula da Silva in January of 2023. The charges were armed criminal association, violent abolition of the democratic state of law, attempted coup, qualified damage, and deterioration of declared patrimony. Minister Alexander de Moraes detailed that the messages, photos, videos, and other publications in social networks were used as evidence by the Attorney General's office against the coup perpetrators. And now let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back from the south. In India, thousands of devotees gathered at the Jama Masjid in Delhi on Thursday to offer prayers on the occasion of the Eid al-Fitr, a 2 or 3 day holiday at the end of the Muslim holiday fasting month of Ramadan, one of the two main Islamic holidays. The main celebration was held at the Jama Masjid Mosque in New Delhi, where the faithful performed special prayers to bid farewell to Ramadan, a month-long period of fasting, prayer, and reflection. The end of the fasting festivals represent a moment of joy, gratitude, and union among Muslim families, who represent 14% of India's 1.4 billion inhabitants at present, being the largest minority group in the Hindu-majority nation. During the Eid al-Fitr, most people travel to visit each other in the city or out of town, and children are given new clothes and spending money for the occasion. Now let's review some facts about the Eid al-Fitr festival that marks the end of the fasting month of Ramadan for Muslims. The Eid is determined according to the observation of the crescent moon. In Ramadan, fasting begins at dawn after the last meal before sunrise. The fast is broken at sunset by eating sweet dates and water. Meanwhile, the Eid al-Fitr celebrations last between 2 and 4 days. Believers surrounded by friends and family pray and eat traditional sweets. In 2024, Ramadan took place between March 11 to April 9th in most Islamic countries. But Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Arab Emirates ended Eid al-Fitr on April 10th due to the crescent moon was not being visible on April 8th in those countries. Arab leaders led the first day of Eid al-Fitr prayers on Wednesday, calling for regional peace. And during daylight hours in Ramadan, Muslims are not supposed to insult, lie, criticize each other, have sex, smoke tobacco as main actions to be closer to God. Now we move on to other topics. And a UNICEF humanitarian aid convoy was hit by Israeli gunfire while on its way to northern Gaza to deliver life-saving supplies to children. The organization stated that the incident occurred on a Wednesday near the military checkpoint in Wadi Gaza, where the convoy was hit by 3 rounds of gunfire. After the incident, the aid workers decided that they wanted to continue with the mission, but it was impossible for them as the occupying army kept them waiting at the checkpoint for more than 2 hours. The convoy was part of a joint mission of UNICEF and the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, carrying food, medicine, and fuel to feed the sanitation and running water systems in Jabalia in the north of the Strip. Israel continues to besiege the Palestinians in Gaza 189 days in a row of bombardment, while the situation of civilians and hospitals continue to deteriorate. Our correspondent Noor Harasin brings us all the details.
Day 189 of this Israeli offensive on the coastal enclave. As usual, as intense, the Israeli forces struck and bombed places in northern Gaza, in middle Gaza, and in southern Gaza. However, Israel intensified its attacks in the Al-Nusayrat refugee camp, where dozens of people were killed in a new Israeli land invasion in the Al-Nusayrat refugee camp. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, 89 Palestinians were killed during the past 24 hours here in Gaza, and this brought up the death toll here in Gaza since the 7th of October up to 33,690 Palestinians, while the number of injuries has now risen to 76, more than 76,000 people. The situation in the hospitals is deteriorating, and for now, the main thing that the doctors inside the hospitals are asking for is to allow medical supplies into Gaza, and also to help the hospitals in Gaza by allowing more patients and more of those who get injured to leave the Gaza Strip and get treatment outside of Gaza. Noor Harazin, teleSUR, Gaza.
In this context, in Palestine, the Israeli regime killed 8 Palestinian civilians near the Ali Arab hospital during its bombing raids in the central Gaza Strip. The occupation army troops intensified their attacks, worsening the situation in the center of the Gaza Strip. The Jabalia and Nusrat refugee camps were victims of new incursions by the Tel Aviv regime, in the midst of which 8 civilians were killed. Since the beginning of the siege, the occupation forces have destroyed entire neighborhoods through the action of military units and fighter planes. Also in Palestine, over 13,000 Gazans are missing, buried in mass graves under the rubble or detained in secret locations of the Israeli army. Human rights organizations urge the international community to take action to introduce mechanisms and specialized teams to remove the rubble from the houses and buildings attacked in the Gaza Strip. They also asked to put international pressure on Israel to guarantee the work and welfare of the people. Meanwhile, they called on the Israeli regime to reveal the whereabouts of the thousands of prisoners in the coastal enclave. And the UN Security Council demanded the immediate lifting of blockades hindering the entry of humanitarian aid for the Palestinian population in Gaza. The agency expressed its concern for the Gazan population and for the Israeli airstrike that killed 7 members of the World Central Kitchen team, stressing the need for accountability for all such incidents and for a full investigation. It also required the parties to the conflict to respect the protected status of humanitarian workers, facilities and operations as established in international law, in addition to complying with the mechanisms of notification and conflict resolution by remediating any deficiencies in such arrangements. We move on to other topics. In Kazakhstan, nearly 100,000 people have been evacuated from regions affected by the worst floods in 80 years to hit the nation. In this context, the Ministry of Emergency Situations detailed that more than a third of the evacuees are children. According to their statement, the state of emergency is maintained in 8 regions of the country, and 67 localities are still isolated due to the floods, which began at the end of March. On the other hand, the Ministry of Agriculture informed that more than 8,000 animals lost their lives in the region. Most of the country's livestock losses originated in the Oilsky district, where also about 340 homes were submerged underwater. And we now have a final short break coming up. But before, we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience. You can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and also share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with teleSUR. Final short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The death toll from a hydroelectric power plant explosion in Italy rose to 5 on Thursday as rescue teams found 2 more bodies and 2 workers are still missing. Emergency services go down almost a dozen floors below the water level at the Enel Green power plant in Barghi on Lake Suviana near Bologna. About 100 firefighters, including 12 divers, remain at the site to search for the 2 people who are still missing. The turbine of the hydroelectric power plant exploded on the 8th floor underwater, killing 5 people. The cause remains undetermined. However, Visconti confirmed flooding at the 9th plant due to a turbine cooling pipe that brought several meters of water. And the Italian Ministry of Culture announced the discovery in Pompeii of a black-walled banquet hall decorated with scenes from Greek mythology. Located in the region of Campania in southern Italy, this Roman city was buried under meters of ashes after a catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79 before Christ. The excavation works of the city started around 1748, and only about 45 hectares have been excavated. Nowadays, this site has become a popular tourist destination in Italy. Pompeii is also part of the Vesuvius National Park, declared World Heritage by UNESCO in the year 1997. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and also on TikTok. For TeleSUR English, my name is Belén de los Santos. Thank you for watching.